Yes, it is really complicated to hire someone that is in a different jurisdiction than what your business is set up to do. And I'm going to use hire a worker generally here because there's a lot of different ways you can hire them. But language and geographic barriers aside, understanding how that workforce typically is employed, how they want to be employed, how you as a business, from a risk perspective, perhaps need to employ them, is a decision that businesses have to make. And then the next step, how do you do that compliantly, is really hard.
Welcome to Hiring Nowadays, a podcast about what makes and breaks successful hiring.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Hiring Nowadays podcast. I'm Calvin Sadal, the CEO and co-founder at Awana. Today, I'm really lucky today to have Miranda. She's with Oyster. She's running and spearheading the legal department over there. Miranda, please tell us a little bit about you and how you got into working at Oyster and heading this really important facet for startups.
Hi, how are you? I am very excited to be talking to you today. My name, as you mentioned, is Miranda. I'm the general counsel at Oyster HR, and we are an employer of record that has been in operation almost 4 years now. And we help businesses expand around the globe by hiring employees remotely. And they may be employees that you're just sort of starting to work in a certain country, or someone that you've had as a contractor for a long time in a particular place, and you've decided that now is the time to convert them from a contractor to a full-time employee. So we see all kinds of use cases, and we support all of those. And I'm really interested to talk to you today about kind of LATAM specifically, and what we're seeing there and how we can help your listeners understand really what the risks are and how to overcome those so that your business can grow and be successful.
Fantastic. And Randy, you're bringing up some really and today specifically targeted and wanted to have this conversation because when the pandemic hit, like pre-pandemic, people were kind of toeing the water of getting into Latin and probably global expansion into remote work. But when the pandemic hit, it was like flooded with requests. Even for us, it was, and to be honest, we kind of handled it a little bit. But once we got the flood of requests, and it wasn't our specialty, we were overwhelmed by like what we had to do. Like for companies, like when it was one or two people, we could handle it. But then when we got 20 to 30 to 50 people that were trying to get paid, and then the different companies that were trying to pay them, we were in over our heads. And yeah, could we have gone down that road and changed paths? Probably, maybe, I don't know. But it wasn't our specialty and wasn't what we wanted to accomplish. And so we knew that handling and dealing with team expansion from a legal and compliance perspective was just too much. Now, I imagine a lot of other startups feel the same way, correct?
Yes, it is really complicated to hire someone that is in a different jurisdiction than what your business is set up to do. And I'm going to use hire a worker generally here because there's a lot of different ways you can hire them. But language and geographic barriers aside, understanding how that workforce typically is employed, how they want to be employed, how you as a business, from a risk perspective, perhaps need to employ them, is a decision that businesses have to make. And then the next step, how do you do that compliantly, is really hard because like you guys are at the front end, right? First, you have to decide how to recruit. Are there pay transparency laws? Are there privacy and data security issues? What salary and benefits are the right package to get the right talent? And so that's tricky, and there are compliance pieces is there. And then once you do hire, like, what does the contract look like? Do I need a local lawyer? How do I even start to find a local lawyer in a country halfway across the world with a language that I don't speak? I don't know how to do that. And maybe I don't have the money to do that. And so I feel like even those basic barriers, how to find someone and how to create a contract, really prevent people sometimes from looking outside of their own space. And it's a problem that, we and a lot of other folks in our space are trying to solve for customers. So, you do have issues like right at the hiring, right at the recruiting, right at the hiring with contracting. And then you get into like the tricky payroll piece, right? And payroll is hard because not only do you have salary, you have to worry about FX, and how your money translates into the currency of other folks. And as you know, like in Latam, that's a huge issue. Even if you have your person, you have your contract, like what currency do you want to be paid in? And how am I going to get the money from my bank to your wallet is tricky in some situations. And then you have taxes, social contributions, all of those other things. And it really, I feel a little bit bad because if someone out there is listening and being like, I'm going to do this, and maybe they're like crawling under their desk now, because it can get really complicated, and multiply that by however many countries you're looking at. But it doesn't have to be, because there are partners out there, and ways to kind of guide folks through exploring these other talent pools, because it's a really great market, great talent, very well educated, really interesting and diverse talents and cultures, and great time zones. Great, I mean, it's really a wonderful market that we should all be looking at, but it can be tricky.
Yeah, I remember I was talking to like oftentimes when I get started, companies might just want to pay them themselves. Like
Mhm.
maybe for the first hire, they're just like, look, I'll just wire transfer the money and I'll just download some services document, right? Like some legal services document, and and put some NDA on. Like all those resources you can find really easy, and you can just wire transfer. Why is that such a bad idea for a startup or SMB to do? And then so there's a lot of ways to just pay people, like blanket name. There's like you could do say there's like MoneyGram or Western Union or Payoneer or TransferWise. Those are just payment portals. I can just pay someone, download a contract, and put an NDA. Why is that such a bad thing to do? Or what is your opinion on that for, say, a startup or
So
small
what I would
business?
say is that may not be a bad thing to do, depending on what you're looking to do with the individual. If you have a project that you need someone to do, it's really clear there's a beginning and there's an end, and this person has freedom to do it however they want to do. That's a great use case for a contractor. And what you're describing, really, that direct payment, that form contract, that's a typical contractor arrangement. And that may be exactly what you need for your business right now. However, I would say think about what the person is going to be doing for you. If you are a startup and you are using this person to help build your company, what intellectual property are you giving them? Are they building for you? And how are you going to own that? How are you going to explain to your investors when you go to raise your next round that you have this person that you have a form agreement with, that you don't know if it covers IP or not, and you're not exactly sure of the regime in that particular country, and maybe your platform is actually owned by this person who doesn't have a non-compete because they are a contractor, and they go spin up their own version of you. That's awful. And that's real. So what I would say is, you have to understand your use case. If you're maybe looking to see if there's a market at all for your product in that location, again, maybe a contractor makes sense. But if you are having that individual do work that is critical to your core business operations, if that person is doing work that is binding your company in this other jurisdiction or anywhere they're operating, if they have intellectual property or they're building it, these are instances where you can go ahead and do a contractor agreement, but it might not be in the best interest of your company. And as you become more successful, as you hire more people, the local agencies are going to see you. They're going to understand that you are working in their jurisdiction. They're going to want corporate taxes from you. They're going to want you to be paying individual employment withholding taxes and social contributions. So, the more successful you are, the greater your risks are when you're operating in this foreign jurisdiction. And ultimately, you have more to lose. So it really is kind of you have to ask why a lot when you're doing employment. And like, why am I hiring this person there? And how does it serve my business? And those questions will typically give you an answer of, okay, I'm going to have this person and a contract is fine. We're going to try this out for 3 months, proof of concept. If it works, great. If not, fine, we'll move on. But really think about like that control, time, what the job they're doing is, and are they building something that you want to own? Because if those, based on those kind of criteria, it'll help you understand what kind of agreement you want to craft. And I would say there's a lot of fine templates out there. That there are a lot of perfectly fine templates out there, but they're not going to be country specific with regard to intellectual property and things like that. You're going to need to do a little bit extra work with partners or with lawyers to get those pieces secured.
Sure. And so how do you, what would you suggest to startups and SMBs they're going through this process? They get scared off by it, and a lot of my experience with the workers in that town, the taxes are really high, and yes, everybody wants their cut, but they oftentimes prefer being a contractor let's say on paper, and then the company will pay extra so that they can purchase all the perks and benefits that they want. Granted, nothing's coming through the company, but they're paying extra so that they have a good life. And then the contractor pays their local business tax. And I see this oftentimes in Brazil where you hire a company and then that person does the work. So I see the question in there is just what is your suggestion there, or what is your guidance there? Because the thing that you point out that all people have a concern about is their IP. I want to do what's right by the people, and what can attract the best people to me. But also I have this company, and you're creating a product for me, and it is long term. It's not just 3 months or 6 months or whatever. It's an ongoing contract, but they have this IP. So how do they safeguard that IP while considering what the worker wants?
Yeah, it is a tough calculus, particularly in high inflation areas, because it is difficult for the worker to see the value of the dollar that the employer may be paying out. And as an employer, you need to be sensitive to that. And what I would say is there are 2 ways to go about this. One, you can take the business risk, and every business has different levels of risk tolerance. You can decide as a business, I want to use these particular individuals and they only want to work as contractors. So what you do in that, and I'm okay with that risk as a business owner. And we should kind of talk a little bit like that business risk is you could be found to be an employer anyway, even though you structure it as a contractor, and that means you're going to have back wages and employer taxes. You could be found to be once you kind of show up on a radar in one agency, they kind of bop you around to all of the other agencies. So then you're like, oh, you're operating here? Okay, well, you need to incorporate and you need to pay back taxes from a corporate perspective. So that can happen. Or none of this could happen, right? It's a roll of the dice. You could perfectly operate with contractors for a long time in that jurisdiction. Now, the other part of that calculus is, what about where you are situated in the country where you are incorporated and the folks that are your investors? How comfortable are they with taking those risks? And are you concerned that perhaps the jurisdiction where you're operating or where you're incorporated might see this and want to attach taxes or other operating expenses to that. Less likely, but again, this is where the IP concern comes in. Ultimately, you may have to pay more if you want the security and the surety around maintaining your intellectual property. You either may have to pay more because you need to get a lawyer to get a very good contractor agreement that includes intellectual property protections. That's one way. The alternative is you might need to pay more for an employee than you thought you would because of the location. I think often folks, that are, near sourcing from North America into LATAM, they think, oh, great folks, great talent, less expensive. Okay, well, maybe less expensive isn't quite as less expensive as you thought it would be. So, maybe you save a third instead of a half. But you get all of these additional protections for the employer, and the employee then gets a serviceable wage for their level and expertise that can allow them to, prosper. It's a calculus, and it includes really what you as a business owner and your investors are willing to kind of consider as a risk. And with all things, the more, I often like do scales. My kids make fun of me all the time. But the more, the risk may be a little bit with one contractor, and that's fine. Everyone's okay and comfortable with that. Once your developer squad starts, building up and you're ramping up, and all of a sudden you have 20 developers in this pod that's working on this one facet, it becomes a little bit more uncomfortable. So I would just encourage people to kind of think about it before you start that foray into that market. Like, what does this look like for you, and what are you willing to risk, and what are you willing to pay? Because those are the choices. More risk, it costs a little bit less, maybe less risk, it costs a little bit more. And it's just going to ultimately come down to a business decision, because anyone that tells you otherwise, any lawyer there, any EOR that you might be using that says, oh, it's never going to happen, they don't really know that. And even using partners, they're not going to completely insulate you from risk, because let's say you go ahead and you hire a group of a pod of developers as employees, but your 15 turns to 25, turns to 40, or we can use a call center operation. It gets bigger because it's working great. You're having good success, you're scaling, everyone's excited, everyone's business is growing. But at a certain point, even when you're working with partners, if you have enough folks working together for your business in an area, it will start to garner attention. You will become someone that folks want to work for, they're talking about, and you may then have that corporate risk of establishing an entity there, even though you don't quite have one there. And they may start asking for more information about why you're not incorporated, what revenue are you making there? All of those sorts of corporate tax issues that you probably don't want to deal with right now at the beginning of your expansion journey.
Yeah, no, I remember even during our story when we were expanding, or we were thinking of expanding, we got all those questions. I go, when it comes to like how much revenue are we making in a certain country? I'm like, we don't make any revenue. We just take the revenue and pay somebody else. I'm like, so our revenue is zero. But the countries don't see it that way. They see, oh, you just sent $50,000 to this country from the US to, say, Ecuador. And they're like, okay, well, you just sent $50,000 down there. We want to cut of that. And then as founder or an executive, you send that 50,000 to then pay people in that country, and you then account for those corporate taxes. Because again, when we look at those idiosyncrasies, there's a lot of things to unpack. Well, again, that's why companies like yourself are out there because we don't know this. I don't know, like, okay, I go open up a business. If I want to start hiring people in Colombia, what are the legal implications? How do I handle? And I think the biggest concern is IP. A lot of the other things come secondary after, like in my experience, like the taxes and all those things, they come secondary almost. And it's, I don't know if it's bad or good, but the first concern I've always seen is IP. How do I protect my IP? I'm hiring there. And say it's just one person, right? They just want to hire one person. So they're not looking at EOR. And in my experience, I haven't come across a lot of companies that do EOR to get a little bit bigger, like you said. They're smaller companies are willing to take a higher risk, but they're like, is my IP protected? I go, well, this is a contract I've seen people use. I'm no legal expert. Have someone else look at it. But you might need, how would you suggest the smaller companies that are like, okay, I'm only hiring one person. The EOR, like setting up an EOR can be a little too expensive. How do you just say, oh, do people just take that risk, or is there any way that at that small level people can protect their IP?
So what I would say is I wouldn't rule EORs out because some EORs like ours also support contractors and they also provide country-specific agreements for contractors. So just because an EOR typically is known for a full-time employee, that doesn't mean that they don't also support country-specific contracting. So it's worth a little bit of like Googling and clicking around if you are thinking about going in a country. So, but if you decide that, no, I want to go this alone, I've got this person, I've worked for Awana, they're amazing, we just want to get a contract done, I would suggest that you have outside counsel look at that contract. And you're going to say, well, how do I find a lawyer? Like, what is it really going to go? Is it really going to be that bad? Maybe not. So what is it? Maybe not. Do a short-term contract with the person. And if you really decide like, okay, well, 3 months in, this person is great, it's worth me spending, $2,000 to $5,000 on a lawyer to check this out. Okay, that's fine. Maybe, it's one of those things because it is $5,000 is not nothing when you are hiring your first person. It is not. And you do need to try to protect it the best you can. And you can, of course, Google a form, you can try that out. But what I would say is that countries are really interesting in the way that they choose to protect intellectual property. Some countries immediately provide the rights to that IP to the individual who creates it. The individual worker, they get the rights directly. Other countries, the employer of that individual immediately gets the rights. So if you're in a country where the employer immediately gets the rights, you're probably a little bit safer than if you were in a country where the employee typically gets the rights. In LATAM, more countries than not do give the employer the intellectual property. So we can't generalize about all countries all around the world, but in general, I think that you will find that in Latin America, the rights go more directly to the employer than the employee. And you may be able to, like I said, try it out, see if someone works for a few months, and then check in to make sure the agreement that you found, through a shared networking site does work for that particular employee. And then you can put them on a more long-term contract if you want. You can put them on an actual employment agreement if you want. You can move them to an EOR platform if you want, because at a certain point, you may have, you may decide that TransferWise isn't working for you, or Wise isn't working for you, or maybe you need to pay in increments that are different or a currency that's different. So that also gives you a chance to really kind of touch base. Any of you that are doing contracting agreements, I would encourage you to put in some sort of reminder or ticker on your calendar for 6 months to a year out. Realistically, in startup world, 6 months is like no time at all. barely get to 6 months and get everyone onboarded before you have to then kind of reevaluate that. So, best practices, 6 months. Realistic, please check in at a year, and decide whether or not this person is critical to your business. And maybe it's time to move them to an employment relationship. And this is always a tricky conversation with contractors, because, they will ask, and rightly so, what's changed?
Mhm.
Agreed when I started that this is going to be the way that I was going to work. And we understand those reasons. Like, why are you changing this now? So you need to be prepared as an employer to answer those questions, and perhaps risk losing that individual if you've decided, this new tranche of investors want employees. And that's often when you have folks that have started out on the contractors and it's going fine. And they are comfortable with their risk, and they are comfortable with their payment rails and all of that sort of stuff. They do get this next level of investor that comes in, as you work through your series. I would say probably by B, they're going to want you to convert your contractors, because they're looking at the risk, as you kind of get closer to a transaction or, an exit. So just be mindful that however you start, even if it's going really well for you right now and your contractors, that may not be the way that you will ultimately need to operate. And just being really frank with folks when you sign them up that, hey, we want to do this, but this might not always be that way, I think is helpful for setting those expectations.
I think so. And I'll say one of the things that you point out when you're talking about EOR as a platform and as a service, it's not just, it's a key component that EOR doesn't, it sounds like EOR doesn't always mean that you're an employee, because you're correct, because through Oyster, you can do contractors and you have that legal compliance locally, correct?
So yeah, depending on EORs, right? And different EORs offer different services. The platform can support various different ways of hiring. At Oyster, we support contractors. We also support employees. In a contractor scenario, you, the employer or the hirer, would be in a direct contract with the worker, but you would use our platform to do so. You can use our platform for payments and contracts and things like that. So it helps a little bit. It gives you kind of a place to go. Also, you can employ someone, you can convert them to an employee if you need to, or you can start them out as an employee. And all of the EOR platforms are going to offer, employment agreements, advice, payment. Different ones will offer different levels of benefits and social contributions, things like that. It's one of those things when you're shopping around, you should talk to folks about their experiences. I think it's really important to talk to, get referrals for folks on the platforms, because they're not all the same. Some are more automated than others. Depending on how you work, that may make a difference. But you can support contractors and employees on most of the EOR platforms. And depending on what you're looking for, they will help convert them as well. If you want to kind of maintain that, some EORs also have payroll. So as your business continues to grow, if you decide at some point to create an entity in that country, then you kind of roll from contractor to employee to then payroll within that same EOR. So there's a lot of options out there. And I encourage folks, like, if you're just sort of thinking about this and it seems overwhelming, visit our website. Look at an EOR, and they'll provide you the cost of employment in the country. They'll let you know kind of basic information about how you employ someone. Sometimes there'll be intellectual property information on the website. So it's a really good place to just start researching and understanding what it would look like if you were going to have someone be an employee. But it'll also give you a flavor for, what the cost of living is in a particular place, what you can expect for taxation, and what your worker is going to really want from you as an employer. And what I would say is just be mindful. I think when you're starting this contract journey, think about this person that you're working with as a business that you're working with in another place. If you were to go and negotiate at arm's length work to be done on your home, for instance, you're going to leave it to the expert to decide when they do the work, how they do the work, what tools they do the work with. And that's really the way you have to engage compliantly with contractors. You have to let them decide. If you want to be compliant, you have to let them decide when to work, where to work. And it needs to look like that on paper and in reality, so that it doesn't look like a shadow or sort of an alternative employment agreement. Things like, time off, like working hours. You can't have that in a contractor agreement. That's not what a contractor is. It is truly saying like, hello, business person in Ecuador, I would like your services. And they say, maybe, maybe not. These are my terms, take them or leave it. And that's kind of the way it is. Expense reimbursements, things like that. It needs to really look like a business to business contract, not an employer-employee relationship. So I would encourage you, as you go forward, as you test these contracts, look for help, look for partners, or, if you're kind of going it alone, then just try to be really commonsensical about like, does this look like a business to business contract? And are my interests, including my intellectual property, protected in this contract?
That's a good point. Because a lot of parts, a lot of for contracts, a lot of people don't think about, okay, because they all have a good heart. I want to hire these people. I want to work with these people. And I want them to feel special. I want them to feel taken care of. And with all that importance, and they go, well, they want to be contractors. That's how to get the best out of that. Often that component of which for people out there, it's called misclassification.
Mhm.
Like if you're putting in so from my understanding, and when you're diving a little deeper into it, if you're putting 9 to 5 in the contract, you're right there. It's stating something of an employment, not a contract, because as you stated, they have to be able to determine how and when they will do the work. If you're now determining how they're and when they're going to do the work, you're already sending a red flag. If again, they're probably not caring if you're just one person not very successful. So maybe if you're at this point and you've been doing this for 10 years and you haven't gotten the red flag, maybe you need to be about your business because you're not that successful yet. Just teasing. But it's you're going to get to a point that if you keep doing this, you're going to get those red flags, and it's going to be more costly. But I know for it's like holidays, um, holidays and like time. Um, But so that's like when kind of like when you operate in the company. When you say how, uh, is that like can you have people attend meetings? Or is like, okay, if I need to have meetings every day at this time, is that still within the contractor confines? Because I've worked with a lot of companies and they go, we have meetings every day at this time or roughly around this time. You can do the work, however, here are your projects, but you need to have these meetings at this time.
I think that you can require like participation in meetings if if it goes to the project that someone has been employed to complete. If it is just a regular management stand up every day, like a squad stand up, then it probably is too much like employment. And I draw that distinction because if you are working asynchronously specifically, and you need to make sure that the code gets transferred from like one person to another. We're talking about just straight up developing, right? Someone works some code, they're testing it, and you're kind of like going through the process of making sure that this piece of code works inside of whatever you're working on. It may make sense to have a meeting every day. But if your meeting is just like, hey, everyone, what are we working on this week? Happy birthday, Joe. Like, we're so glad to have Sue back. Like, that is not a type of a meeting that a contractor should be invited to. A celebration of or a kind of company-wide meeting about unfolding company events. Again, not a meeting that a contractor should be invited to. I really encourage folks to think about it like, if you are building a house, and this is kind of another analogy, if you're building a house, think about this contractor as the plumber. You are not going to invite the plumber to come to the meeting with the people that are doing the sound system. They're not working together. They shouldn't work together. There's no reason for them to be in the same room together. So you really, you need to keep the plumber focused on the plumbing, and you should be prepared for the fact that the plumber may want to go and plumb work at your neighbor's house. And the plumber may get busy with some other customers' escalation that came in. And you really need to think about like, okay, well, the plumber's going to go, unclog the toilet down the street, and they're not going to be where I thought they were going to be today. And that's okay. Some companies are really comfortable without having that control. Others, it makes them really uncomfortable. So when you're thinking about working with contractors, I think it's important to consider how well your organization works in pods, how well your organization works asynchronously, because all of those things will support a contractor working independently of the rest of your organization. And that's truly what a contractor should be. They should be independent of your actual operations and only used for project-based work. It could be a long project, but project-based work or temporary hiring and filling needs. And
Yeah.
if you can't make it work like that, if it's trying to put like a round peg into a square hole, then you should really probably rethink the way that you're going to engage with this individual.
And that's not to say, like you pointed out, it can be a long-term project. I know companies like Google and Microsoft have contractors for 2, 3, 4 years at a time. Government contracts can last really long. So it's not to say you can't do it, but those people that are doing the contractors at Google, they're not the all standards for talking about the new Google product that's coming out, the new Microsoft product that's making. I mean, I guess it can be. Can you like give them an optional, like, hey, this is going to happen. If you want to come. You're not obligated to come. I assume that is still out there, but it's like, hey, you have no reason to join it.
Yeah, I think it's better just legally not even to invite them, because if there is if there is the thought that maybe they're going to miss out on something that might be important to their work, and this is the same with your actual employees. Like, if they don't need to be there, don't invite them, because by inviting them, you may make them like required to be there in some cultures, and as well as from a legal perspective, and you're going to have to pay them, right? Also, like, if you're going to invite someone there, you're going to have to pay them to be there. So you really need to kind of think about it. And like I said, I get that depending on where you are in your journey as a company, you may be really unworried about these things. And I think everyone understands that. But the Microsofts and the Googles of the world, which, I hope all of you become Microsofts and Google. Like, that's what we want, right? They have to actually rotate their contractors out on 6-month basis. There's a whole body of like law based on Microsoft's poor contracting processes. So it is tricky to use contractors well. I think as a startup, you're kind of in the safest possible space to try that, because your risk tolerance is high. You're moving through, frankly, work pretty quickly, so you can do multiple project-based contracts. What we found at Oyster is most employees now really only stay somewhere 14 to 18 months. So the total time that you might be engaged with a particular talent is limited, so that also limits your risk somewhat. So I'm not saying, as a lawyer, I'm saying you should always do the right thing legally. But as a pragmatic business person, the understanding is that you're going to take some risks. Now's probably the time to take some risks, but be smart about it. And again, think about like the most important things for business are probably where is your intellectual property? What is your recourse against this person if things go south? And how much control do you want over the process right now? And it may be that you want that control, and you get that through an employment contract. And that's what I'm saying. So, think about your growth and your employment strategy, perhaps in sprints, to be really kind of like, let's think about like what we're doing right now. Let's get an MVP and then like let's reevaluate. And like I said, you don't want to be spending, I know, too much of your time on employment strategy, but spending a little bit of time on it and a little bit perhaps more money than you initially thought that you would is really going to secure your ability to scale, to grow, to have those partnerships in place, and just to feel comfortable that you are doing what's right for you right now. And I think that that's part of it, just, having that comfort that like, okay, this is the strategy we're going to have for this year. And we know that these are the risks and we're all aware. And like I said, talk to your workers about this. This is what we're going to try this. But, we want to be Google and we want to be incredibly successful. And that means that this might change for you and it might change for us. And I think if you go into it with that attitude and that level of transparency, then you're going to start building a stronger relationship with your workforce. And that's going to also cover over like that. That'll help in those rough spots where there might be disagreements, where there might be challenges and those rough spots are where things typically come to attention of the authorities. Either that or you're just doing a great job and you're making lots of money and doing lots of corporate splashes and everyone wants to work for you, which is also a wonderful measure of success. So you're either really successful or you have someone that's really angry with you, and you want to try to make sure that you're successful and you don't have angry employees or contractors.
Yeah. Thank you, Ryan. You gave a lot of final points of like how to think about the misclassifications. What do startups need to think about truly when they're working with these people? And I love the analogy you used about the house. I don't think anyone's really talked to me and broken it down, and that's a really valuable way for companies to think about it. They're like every tech founder I talk about is like, oh, we're a community. They think about this more as not very a legal framework. They think about this, oh, we want to treat these people right. You have not said that you don't treat these people right. It's more or less, I think it's kind of funny. It's like, okay, until you get to Series B, take a higher risk. And get to see closer to Series B, you really need to de-risk yourself.
Mm-hmm.
And but that's not legal advice, it's pragmatic business advice.
It is. Well, and so much of like being an in-house lawyer is really understanding where you have the appetite to take risk and where you have the appetite to not take risks and what that means for your business over time, right? Because that's going to change as the needs of the business change, as the needs of or the demands, I should say, of your investors change. And frankly, how successful you are. The more successful you are, the more you want to build that strong foundation, so that when you do go for that next round, you're compliant. You have your contracts. You have and you can explain why someone is employed in a contract position instead of an employment position. Even if they disagree with your risk profile or what you've chosen to do, if you can explain that you have thought about this and you have tried to set up this arrangement or this engagement in a way that is compliant for the work that needs to be done and that you're open to change in the future, even having that conversation with an investor or with an employee, as I said, will help just improve your credibility with them, and it gives you some space to try things out But just know that, the more successful you are, the more laws there are to follow, and there are more folks like me will be like, giving you side eye and be like, well, maybe it's time to move into this other framework, and that's okay. But think about what's right for you right now and where you see yourself. Do those compliance health checks every 6 months to a year about, does this still fit, or do I need a different model?
Yeah. Thanks, Miranda, for sharing all that information. And we'll put we'll put some information on Oyster in the show notes. Anything else you'd like to share? Anything else you'd like to share or provide?
Sure. I would say we've talked about a lot of, from my perspective, and I talk about it a lot, overwhelming things. It can seem really insurmountable when you have this great idea. You're going to go out and you're going to use this, talented individual you've met through your networks or you've heard about. Don't let that unknown prevent you from going out there and engaging that talent that is across the border. Talk to partners, talk to colleagues, use your networks. Oyster is mission driven, and I've been there from the beginning. What is important to me is bringing incredible work to people around the world. And my life is so much richer for the folks that I work with around the world, both from the work product that we create, the friendships that we've made, and just my understanding of what can be possible. So I really want folks to kind of go away from this talk with not, oh my gosh, this is so hard, but it's doable. It is absolutely doable. There is a right fit for each company at each stage if you're interested in looking beyond your borders. And feel free to reach out to me, to Oyster, to other EORs. Like I said, there's a lot of folks in this industry that want to help, and do give folks a shot outside of your own borders, because I think you will really be impressed with what you can accomplish.
Agree with that. And one of the reasons why we're focused in LATAM is we do what you're saying, give folks a chance. We believe in LATAM as one of the key component driving values for mission and everything. We believe that LATAM has to transform a company. And if you just are too scared to make that jump, you stagnate. You go with what you know, and you don't give those people a chance. I love that. How you look at it as well.
Yeah, I think it's great. I was going to say, and we have great lawyers in LATAM, so it's always fun. It's always fun. We try to keep them in LATAM. They go back and forth to Spain a lot and Portugal. I feel like it's really lovely. It's actually really lovely to have also that cross-pollination of ideas and folks going home. And that's another way that you can find EORs to be helpful is when people decide to go home. Wherever home may be, they may be coming back to LATAM, or they may be going back to continental Europe, but that ability to transfer and be where they need to be for their personal life is really a great gift that you can give to them as an employer.
Yes. It's beautiful. Thank you, Miranda, for everything, and I look forward to staying in touch.
Yeah, thanks. It's been really fun talking to you today.
Thanks for tuning in and spending a part of your day with us. We appreciate it. If you enjoyed this podcast, please subscribe, rate, and leave us a review. We are on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and YouTube. Have questions? Head over to awana.io and ask away.